So welcome you all. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Phyllis Lefebvre, and I am a member of the Temple Beth Or Tikkun Olam Committee, and I co-chair the Environmental Sustainability Subcommittee with James Cantor. And so this evening, we'd like you to enjoy this panel discussion.
Hi and welcome. I'm Deborah Hooker, and along with Phyllis, I'm one of the co-leaders of the Central North Carolina and Cape Fear Region Citizens Climate Lobby chapter. Citizens Climate Lobby lobbied hard for the Inflation Reduction Act, and that act has funding for urban forestry, especially for underserved communities. So we are here tonight to learn how to make sure that the funds get to those targeted communities.
Great to see you all. I'm Lynn Lyle with ICCT, Interfaith Creation Care of the Triangle, with this blessing. May the spirit of love, reverence for all life on earth, and the joy of being together tonight with our extended family here at Temple Beth Or and on Zoom, all caring for creation. May it be with us now and in the times to come. Amen. So ICCT is a network of people from 82 faith communities, Temple Beth Or among them, and people of conscience working on climate and environmental justice. ICCT is now in the middle of 2 sets of listening sessions. The first to listen to the thoughts of our youth on creation care and climate. You're invited to bring youth to sessions already scheduled in Durham and Raleigh starting early this summer, or we will bring one to the youth at your congregation. We also invite you to join ICCT Voices at One Wake listening sessions as we raise the needs of low-income families coping with steeply rising utility bills and how IRA and infrastructure funding might help with energy efficiency improvements if we can make it accessible. Now, I can't wait to hear from Rachel and then, of course, our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, ladies. Can everybody hear me? Okay. My name is Rachel Karasik. I am a member leader from Carolina Jews for Justice. We're a grassroots social justice organization, and for many progressive Jews in North Carolina, a cultural home. And we are home for both congregationally affiliated and not affiliated Jewish folks. So I'll be your moderator tonight, and I'm going to do a little bit of talking up front, but then I promise I will stop talking and let the wonderful panelists talk. I also want to take a moment. I like talking about jovial and exciting and comfortable things, so this is a little uncomfortable for me. But I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the really challenging landscape that we've been in North Carolina for the past couple of weeks. I know that in my community at CJJ and in these communities, other communities that you all are part of, people are fighting for reproductive justice, people are fighting for voting rights, people are fighting for community safety and gun reform, and the landscape is changing quickly and it's really scary. And so I just want to acknowledge that and hold some space that I think many of us are really concerned about a multitude of issues, and they're intertwined because justice is always intertwined. And you know, every week feels really heavy, but I think the past couple of weeks, at least for me and my community, have felt particularly heavy. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and be in that moment of discomfort. So I want to talk a little bit about the genesis of how we got here. Carolina Jews for Justice work is centered around education, advocacy, and action. And we do that through coalition building and coalitional organizing. And so when I was connected with Phyllis and Lynn and Deborah, I think we all recognized that this is the path forward to work together. We are all directly affected by climate change, and we want to build on the incredible work that's already being done through our organizations. We want to focus on the intersection of climate and justice in the triangle. So what we heard from our communities, from our organizations, from the Goose is Loose, is that, you know, the folks that are here tonight and joining on Zoom, they really feel like they're doing everything they can to work for climate. They show up to the polls, they, you know, get out the vote in their homes and in their congregations. They're fighting for sustainability efforts. And we're in this historic moment where there are billions of dollars that are now being available, that are unlocked for the exact kinds of projects that we need to start building resilience in our communities. And the news about them is flying at us. There's new grants being out every day. And sometimes we're also hearing that vulnerable communities, the communities that are most affected by climate change and by systemic oppression, aren't being able to access those funds. And so I speak on behalf of, I think, the folks that I've spoken to, which is we want to know what we can do as community members, as individuals, as folks who have organizational strength to support those funds. And we're looking forward to hearing from you guys. And if the answer is sit back and let us do our thing, then that's fine. But I think we just want to know, because there's so much motivation and eagerness to be part of this historic moment. And so we wanted to really focus in on how our communities can be involved in climate justice issues that are really pertinent to the triangle. And urban forestry and, you know, the history of redlining and systemic racism in this region really came up. So tonight we are here to talk about urban forestry and racism and climate and the way that they link and what we can do about it. And I will quickly introduce our panelists, who are wonderful and very patient as I talked, but then I'll also allow them to, in their words, introduce themselves. So we first have got Janelle Rogers. Janelle is the executive director of the environmental justice nonprofit Trees Durham, located in Durham, North Carolina. At Trees Durham, they take direct action to preserve, care for, and plant trees while building partnerships to advocate for socially just tree policies. As a certified community action professional, working in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years, Janelle loves being of service to underserved and divested communities. She is focused on collaborating with other businesses whose goals involve achieving self-sufficiency, fighting poverty, and addressing environmental challenges. And as a Durham resident, I'm very grateful that she has joined. And then we have Bonita Green, also a Durham native and longtime resident in Merrick-Moore. Bonita is president of the Merrick-Moore Community Development Corporation. Bonita's parents were both active in the Merrick-Moore community. Her father, Samuel, served for many years as president of the Neighborhood Association, and her mother, Hattie, organized fundraising events. In her leadership role, Bonita's goals for the CDC are wrapped in community activism, which includes ensuring resident safety by advocating for improved neighborhood infrastructure, seeking resources for those requiring financial help with needed home repairs, overseeing the development of our community-owned property into a community garden, food forest, and renewing a sense of community by creating opportunities for neighbors. And last but not least, we have Andrew Pleninger, the Urban and Community Forestry Program Head at the North Carolina Forest Service. Mr. Pleninger has over 35 years of experience working in urban community forestry, starting with working in the city of Rochester, New York, leading the forestry division in the protection and management of the city's 72,000 public trees. Then he was the vice president of Urban Forestry LLC, an arboricultural and urban forest management consulting firm providing services to municipal and commercial clients in New York State. So quite the urban forestry expert. And then in 2018, he returned to his true passion, which is urban forestry. Mr. Pleninger is a published author, co-authoring several scientific articles, the ABC's Field Guide to Young and Small Tree Pruning, and he is also an experienced presenter. So we have quite the wealth of knowledge and expertise here, and we're really grateful that you're joining us. So to start off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you work? And I'll start with you, Janelle.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. Again, my name is Janelle Rogers. I am the new executive director with Trees Durham. You are probably used to hearing from Katie Rose Levin. She is still an arborist on our board, but she has such a wealth of knowledge and just understanding how to take care of trees and how we're involving the community. So I'm grateful to have started the beginning of this year. As Rachel has said, I've worked in nonprofit for over 20 years. I started as a nonprofit volunteer at the age of 18. I know I probably look like I'm 20. But I started really, really young, and I started as a volunteer. Then I worked my way up into the financial development or financial directing of the nonprofit. Then I got a chance to work as a program director and then going even to the state of North Carolina to give out grants for low income and underserved communities, and then going back to manage nonprofits. So a lot in my wheelhouse. Environmental injustice or justice is not my first will or my first love. I started in self-sufficiency work, then I started working with mental health. Then I went into, again, self-sufficiency, health disparities, and now back into environmental. So a lot of different understanding about what to do. And so one of the things I love about Trees Durham is that we don't just plant trees, we don't just educate how to take care of them, but we also try to make a connection to let low-income individuals and even individuals just love trees in general, that trees increase in tree canopy really leads to the health, the wealth, and the happiness of your community. So in whatever way that it looks like you want to be connected, whether you want to plant a tree, if you want to learn about ordinances and how to really get involved with advocating for what you need on your property, or even just spreading the information with the youth and schools and so forth, we really try to teach on what that looks like. And so as a new executive director, originally from Maryland, but lived in Eastern North Carolina, I'm very, very connected to low income, understanding the struggles, right? With Black and brown people, individuals that look like me that are more focused on the struggles of life, right? Not really understanding the impact of what trees do to us. So really being able to teach on that level with Trees Durham is very, very important. So definitely looking forward to getting into the community and really finding out ways that we can partner.
Good evening, folks. Well, yeah, listening to my little bio there, you can tell, and the uniform, that I'm an urban forester, true and true. Community forestry is a part of that. And I kind of want to start with the urban and community forestry are really kind of two disciplines that work together. Urban forestry is really the planting, maintenance, protection. It's the forestry side of managing trees in urban areas. Community forestry is engaging the community in that management. We have two groups here. Ultimately, what we're doing this all for is for the people that live there, in our neighborhoods and in our communities. And the benefits trees provide, pretty clear. But our role at the Urban Community Forestry Program from the North Carolina Forest Service is to provide technical assistance and financial assistance. We do grants we have 554 municipalities across North Carolina, as well as partnering with community organizations such as Trees Durham and all you folks too, to further our mutual goals.
Okay, so a little bit about me. I am the youngest of 6 children of my parents and was born in Durham, raised in Durham. And as the youngest, I was always like opinionated and outspoken and all of those, rebellious and all of those lovely things. So growing up in a community that was an underserved community, we were a resilient community. So that was instilled in me as a child in my youth. I've had the opportunity to grow up with parents who farmed, who were of the earth, of the land. They farmed and gardened. So that was instilled in me from a very young age. But when I decided to go off on my own, I wanted no parts of that. And so it's just really interesting that now full circle, I'm back in my community doing those things, trying to create that resiliency and that sense of community that we used to have when I was a child, when everyone knew each other. And now, new people are moving in, neighborhoods are changing, people don't know each other. And when you don't know your neighbors, then you're not as trusting, you're a little bit more suspicious, and you're not as comfortable in the place that you live. And so I'm trying to recreate that level of comfort that we used to have.
That's a really lovely intro. And by the way, I'm going to ask questions. We have a lot of questions, but I encourage you guys to also respond to each other, feedback, dialogue. I know that, you guys have different elements of expertise, so hoping to bring that out. Talked a little bit about the benefits of urban forestry, but, our next question is, can we talk a little bit more about what those benefits are? And then can you tell us about that link between urban forestry and urban trees and the legacy of racism and systemic oppression in North Carolina and the Triangle specifically? Are there patterns? Are there trends? Are there particularly harmed populations that, looking now are best served by this increase in funds? And I will go reverse. So Bonita, you first, unless somebody else wants to.
Oh, wow, me first. So I think where I'm going to start at is that acknowledging, or, it needs to be acknowledged that the Black community has a completely different relationship with trees than other people do. And it's particularly big, tall, strong oaks, And so, trees are an important thing in a community, but I think we have to at first acknowledge that before we go into places and say, we're going to plant trees for you. Isn't that wonderful? We need to ask people, do they want trees? Or what type of trees that they want, because they may not. And then as people get older and they're aging in place, the other thing that's a consideration is, how are they going to maintain the trees? We have to really look at things broadly when we're talking about trees, because they are important. They do serve a purpose. They do, filter the air. They do, hold us grounded in space. But not everyone has the same relationship with trees. And so those are things, as we move into communities that have been previously divested in, then we need to go in with an ask and a listen, and then hear before any action is taken.
You're here. I could cite I'm a manager. I have and served as a city forester, and so all the community has been my customers. North Carolina, everybody is my customer. But certainly I had some experience both as a consultant. We're doing inventories of trees in different municipalities, and when you walk every street in the municipality, you get a pretty good picture of every neighborhood. Now, certainly I'm looking at the trees, but it is about the people. So one of the common things is in underserved or disadvantaged communities is just lack of service, if they're not requesting service or they're ignored. So over time, what has happened in most municipalities in terms of the urban forest cover is that it declines and it never gets replaced. So then we have these voided areas. So that is the challenge there afterward. But as Benita pointed out, arriving and saying, particularly a middle-aged white guy coming in and saying, hey, you need to plant trees, isn't going to work. And in fact, there was a Detroit study, I don't know if you're familiar with that one, that it's common sense, I as a city forester and managing service requests, you got to ask folks, when you show up at their door, let them know you're coming. kind of common quality customer service, but these types of things don't happen. So what they found actually in these, I think they were particularly, they were predominantly African-American communities, was that what were the issues? What, maintenance was number one. You know, well, who's going to water it? Who's going to prune it? Who's going to take care of it? There were a lot of ingrained. I'm probably not using the right term, but misconceptions. They thought around the 40s and 50s, Dutch elm disease came in and impacted the American elm, and it would kill them. But the perception of the African-American community in Detroit and some of those cities was that they were removing the trees so that they could see the people. So, you know, there are all these embedded, right or wrong. So nobody had, you know, as we said, everybody wanted to go and plant trees and assume they want them, but nobody had bothered to ask, you know, go in and say, what do you think about planting trees first? So, as we go on a little bit longer, I think that's where you folks can be a real help in terms of where we're headed. Just to quickly, you want some statistics? 320 million urban trees in North Carolina. They contribute $3.53 billion annually in terms of economic jobs, economic growth. Reduce energy bills by 150 million, capture 2.1 million tons of carbon per year, 50 tons of air pollutants per year, and reduce runoff by 19 to 24% in a canopy covered residential area. So there's some of the benefits.
We can fold this into, you know, the next ugly truth, which is climate change. So, you know, urban trees are really at the intersection of historic marginalization and climate change. We have opportunities to rectify these issues, but what do you think about how communities that have so far or since, you know, the 50s been excluded from the benefits of urban forestry, how are they affected in the Triangle specifically or broadly by the effects of climate change?
So how do we answer that? I guess it starts with what Ms. Bonita said about the listening to the needs of the community. If I am a person that is trying to advocate for some type of law or change, hopefully I will want to be able to talk to the individuals that are being affected by it and being able to understand how we can actually work together to mitigate or to answer that particular issue. And so as it was already pointed out previously, if we don't know how to talk to our individuals in our communities or even to build trust with the individuals that we're trying to help, or if you don't even vote because you feel like your voting choice is really a clear representation of who you are and what you stand for, then I feel like 9 times out of 10, you're not going to really speak up and advocate for what it is that you need because you're in fear of not being heard. So just even as the new executive director with Trees Durham, my interaction with our communities is for me just to show up, like not showing up as the executive director of Trees Durham, not showing up as, you know, all these accolades of things that I've done, but literally just sitting to listen and figure out how I can support you. And 9 times out of 10, it might be that I can't, right? But hopefully with someone that I know that is connected to me that may be just as passionate about the issue in your particular community can help. And so that's where collaboration comes from. That's where networking comes from. That's where really reaching out and asking these questions, hard questions, and being able to say, I don't know, but let me go back and find the answer. And so I think also too, because I'm not originally from here, but grew up in Eastern North Carolina, that was one thing my parents always taught, is to learn the environment that you're in, understand the culture that you're in, so you understand how to be a support. But then even once you learn, don't just go in and ask for what you want to do, right? Just really sit and listen, back to what Benita said. So, but also giving a voice to the community to let them know, look, your input really does matter. If you don't show up, then how do we know how to fight for you, those that are out and trying to make some type of change? And so just circling all that back around to climate change, if we don't have trees in these neighborhoods that that are being affected with these high utilities and these poor water quality issues, right? Trying to figure out a way to bring that home to them, to help them make a connection of why, right? Even just interviewing with Trees Durham, I was like, what the heck am I going to say on this interview to be able to say, how do I connect to what we do? And I had to go back and really research, I didn't really pay attention to trees being an air filter. It was almost like this unseen benefit, but seen benefit, and really trying to figure out how we can connect to it. And then from there, really listening to the community.
So clearly, where there's low canopy cover, climate change, living in that area, those environmental conditions are more severe. Heat, flooding, all those benefits that we get from trees, where we have low canopy, those communities are not realizing those benefits, and the health benefits, that are associated with that. So certainly urban forestry can play a significant role in modifying that environment physically by tree planting and so forth. But as we're hearing, it's not that simple. And from our side, my side, what I try to do is get tools together to help communities do those things. Certainly from the forestry perspective, for example, I am funding a lot of canopy cover assessments that do land cover analysis and identify those areas that are low canopy cover, and then overlay demographic data, and then target areas that adding trees can provide the most benefit. But then that goes down to creating a project on the ground and into some more important things that need to be addressed, just other than planting trees.
So, fun fact is that my neighborhood sits northeast of downtown Durham, and it was agricultural land. So we were residential rural. Had a lot of trees. Still do have a lot of trees in this area, but we are considered a heat island. And so, why is that? I don't know. Could be we're surrounded by industrial and highways and train tracks and all of those other fun things. But looking at where Black people live or where brown people live, if you're living out a little bit more in suburbia or whatever, then you probably have trees. You may have older trees, but it's like, where are those trees located, and are they providing adequate shade for your property and for your home? The other thing to think about, I don't know how Raleigh has it, but in Durham, if living in inner city spaces, and particularly like affordable housing is considered DHA housing, those properties have no trees. They don't allow for green space whatsoever. So those are definitely areas where children are growing up without the luxury of having, green spaces and trees and places to play. They're growing up without that. So what are the health effects of that are betrayed upon those particular children and those particular families? So, and then also, once upon a time, someone asked me, we were doing like a Creek Smart type flooding type situation. I'm like, well, my neighborhood doesn't flood. And then I had to rethink, because I'm like, you know what, I answered that very quickly, but I'm only thinking about where I live, because my home sits on top of a hill, whereas other homes in our community sit below the level of the street, you know? And so we have to kind of change up our lens sometimes, because we tend to look at things from the perspective and place of where we currently are and we live in our lives. And we have to change up and just put ourselves in the shoes of the people that we think we're trying to help. You know, we have to be in the space with them.
Thank you. There's so much there. You know, I think we're all familiar with flooding and heat being common issues in North Carolina that are only getting worse, but also thinking about how children grow up. I was talking to somebody about stuff having to do with my work, but the cognitive dissonance that children have to go through, where at school they're learning about climate change, and then at home they have no trees, and they're served everything in disposable, whatever. It's hard to imagine young kids reconciling those two realities at the same time and managing them. So yeah, there's so much there. Thank you guys so much. So turning to kind of where we are in this moment, we understand that there are millions of dollars in funding from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that are now available to local governments and community organizations, specifically for urban forestry projects, which is hopefully very encouraging for us, and our communities are getting access to those. So what can you tell us about those available funds from the Inflation Reduction Act and other legislation? Who administers those funds? How do you interact with those funds? Are they available now? Some of the nitty gritty, just for those of us who are less in the weeds of how this works.
Okay, I can provide a lot of information. So there's the Inflation Reduction Bill. You mentioned the infrastructure bill. There's a lot of different pieces to each of those bills. And I can only speak to the urban forestry pieces to say that we did get a slice of some of the BIL, the infrastructure bill, and that has been passed down in some grant work. In fact, I was just describing doing canopy cover assessments, those land cover analysis. Quite a bit of that money went, and we've funded, I'm just finishing up 15 of those across the state. Anyway, the Inflation Reduction Bill, though, is certainly the biggest piece in it. There was $1.5 billion dedicated specifically to urban and community forestry. And that is that it went to the Forest Service under the Urban and Community Forestry Program, which funds the North Carolina Forest Service, including me, our program for the state. So that $1.5 billion last August was passed. As soon as December, they were asking for proposals from us. It's been moving extremely fast, which is unusual for the government. But that also makes it fairly challenging. So what is going on right now is this money has been split into two buckets right now. They have a notice of public offering out right now where entities, and I'll talk about this in a second, can apply directly to the USDA Forest Service for funding urban and community forestry projects. The second bucket is us, the North Carolina Forest Service, and we were allocated $6.375 million over 5 years for urban community forestry projects, but only in disadvantaged communities. And those are defined by a tool that is, and I'm forgetting, I'm sorry, you can go to it, you can look up the reference, but it is the climate and economic justice tool. And essentially, based on demographics and all those other things, identifies these disadvantaged communities on a census block tract basis. So as we roll out funding, it would be for projects that are within one of these disadvantaged census tracts or multiple. The other significant aspect of this is that these funds, typically when we do granting, we do match, for every dollar, you've got to match $1 as part of your contribution to it. This is no required match, so it really funds 100% of the project. There are lots of activities that can be funded. You heard me kind of define urban forestry pieces and community forestry pieces, engaging the community, working hand in hand. So that federal offering is only open till June 1, but I will be pushing that out probably in August. We're kind of waiting for some last minute details from the feds. But then on a regular January, July request for applications process. Now, one of the other things about any of this grant funding is that it has to go to a government entity, a municipality, a town, a tribal government, or a not-for-profit, or a public school or university. So we don't fund neighborhoods, so to speak. We have to fund one of those entities that designs, and we don't design the projects. You come to us with a project and a budget and how you're going to do it, and you get funding. So that's kind of the meat and potatoes of it.
Thanks. Do you guys have any other?
Do community gardens was the question. Well, trees. It'll fund the trees. So if we want to talk about some very food forests, for community type area, those types of things, but it's urban forestry, so and that's kind of a challenge for many. I'm getting calls about they want to build a park. Well, all I could do is plant the trees. I can't build the park. So I try and steer you to another funding source, the BIL maybe, that has some money to help put the roads and build the buildings that you want on the park. So that's one of the challenges. But that's what we're here at the Forest Service for, to help you work through those things.
Great. I love the interactions between the panelists. So maybe from those of you who are seeking to access those funds, what do you see as the primary barriers to being able to access them and ensuring that they're getting into the right hands, or they're serving the communities that you're seeking to serve best? Or are they working perfectly?
First of all, we're grateful for the dollars that are available. However, there's a lot of technical work that goes behind the scenes to put this together. And I was sharing with a couple of people when I first started, it's been, I think this will probably be my 7th grant of submitting since January when I started. And it takes a lot of really understanding your capacity, right? How much you can actually administer what you're writing, right? Or even trying to find the partnerships and collaborations to actually help you put this together. The good thing I love about Trees Durham is the fact that we are committed to planting trees. And so for me to be already understanding the red line districts and where to go and the schools and just planning out events of where we plant, that's what we do anyway. And so even just trying to be creative and understand where to plant more trees or to build the partnerships in is kind of like where I am right now. I work with Bonita and Merrick-Moore and several other communities in Durham that are committed to that tree canopy. So that's cool, but however, I'm the only person doing this right now. So trying to engage volunteers, trying to understand their level of commitment, you know, what they want to learn, what they want to do, but then also making sure that the other entities that I am working with, we have similar goals, right? Because I don't want to write a grant and what I want to do is totally different than what you want to do and your mission and where you're trying to go and what kind of needs you need for building your capacity as well. So just really understanding, like Andy and Bonita were talking about earlier today, is just really understanding what type of services you can do, who you can partner with that, and then kind of sit back and work out the logistics and funding and those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I'm that person that's going to push the envelope and ask people to plant fruit-bearing trees. Because, you know, especially if you're going into underprivileged neighborhoods, they might be food insecure. They're not getting access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And typically when government plants, they only plant male trees because they don't want to clean up the mess from the fruit-bearing trees. But fun fact, growing up with asthma, lung transplant recipient here, male trees produce more pollen. So they produce pollen, you know, to pollinate the female trees. You got no female trees. You got a higher pollen content in the air. You have more respiratory issues that are there. So plant fruit-bearing trees.
I see we have a response from Andrew.
I just want to, and it's a food forest is kind of, in fact, if you were to go to our website and look at a community forestry project, a food forest would be something that we identify as something fun, and it's design an orchard that's going to produce food for the neighborhood. I feel it's important kind of add, because this is the biggest challenge, even for non-disadvantaged communities, is capacity. Leadership, capacity, and expertise are the three things that I preach. You know, if you don't have one of those, you're going to be limited. You know, leadership, it starts with somebody saying, you know, we need to do this, because otherwise, you know, it's not going to happen, right? If we don't want it, it's not going to happen. And so you need somebody that's going to take the charge and say, all right, we need to do this. And so this is a challenge in every community. And do you have the people and the capacity to get the work? Do you have the expertise to design a food forest? It's not real complicated, and you can also get somebody to do it. But these are things that just need to be kind of checked off the list and go down and design a project and then be able to manage it through implementation, and then also do all the grant reporting, which can be challenging. And engaging the community is a part of this. Those are the things that get missed and are not particularly complicated, but in most cases, with all the grants monies that we push out, where I have the biggest challenge is capacity and people. So I've been redesigning our whole grant program, trying to simplify it and focus anybody that's going after a grant to smaller projects rather than getting too grandiose. But that is the biggest challenge. So community groups, individuals, if you can find ways that you can help address those capacity issues, you can have a significant role.
Wonderful. I certainly don't think I could design a food forest. Trying to be cognizant of time. There's 1 million questions, so we're going to be here for 3 hours. But maybe to wrap up before we get to the audience questions, this is a twofer. Some of our audience members comprise these affected communities, and some of our audience members have relatively more privilege and more protection. And I think both are eager to help, whatever that may be. So kind of looking to the audience, how can they help build this capacity, or like, what are the opportunities for people who are passionate about this to help? And yeah, go for it.
So I say that if you're going into community and you're having these conversations and you're listening to hear and to understand what they're saying, you develop a plan and a strategy together, but education is a real key to that, as well as getting youth involved. And so we are building a community garden / food forest, because we've got just under 2 acres of land. So we're developing that out right now. And as far as designing it, we work with, North Carolina State has wonderful professors. They have a School of Agricultural and Design over there. They have great people that will help do that, as their due diligence and give back to the community. You've got your high schools. Southern High School is very close to my neighborhood. They've got agricultural programs there. Merrick-Moore Elementary is in my community. Their schools have an open space garden, that's going on for the elementary school. So the training starts there. Resources can be there in the community for some of the capacity work, but education is key, training is another, but really being able to source, like with us, we source volunteers a lot when we're working. Keep Durham Beautiful in Durham has a tool lending library, so we haven't had to buy tools, it's a little bit of investigative work, but there's stuff that you can source naturally, and we've had a lot of support from our nonprofit partners in the work that we're doing. So,
First on my list was, certainly engage, but ask. Ask what they need with help, but don't come in assuming. So I still, in terms of this group, and I've seen success, particularly with faith-based organizations that can go through the churches in a neighborhood and help be the community ambassadors, engaging and getting them, a community involved in the project. So whatever project idea there may evolve, the community needs to be involved in do they want it? And then the design and the decision process all the way down to it happening. So I see faith-based organizations and individuals can go into hopefully reach out to other faith-based organizations in the neighborhood and be a good ambassador.
Because I'm money-minded, I'm going to say donate. Donate, 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 donate. Time, money, come help us, right? Like I said, for me, it's just me, but we work very well together in just picking up the phone and saying, hey, Andy, I have no idea how to fill out this grant application. Can you give me some ideas, right? Andy will say, no, that's too big, or bring it down, or Benita will tell me, hey, did you think about giving away this tree because this type of tree helps with this particular issue in this particular neighborhood. So like I said, even with Trees Durham, we partner with Keep Durham Beautiful. We partner with Ellerby Creek Watershed Association. We even give out trees to individuals that want and need a tree on their property. And then I give out the pamphlets of how to take care of it, right? And if you even need some help to be able to put it in the ground, we can do that as well. So, if there's individuals that's around you that don't have a tree, reach out to me and be like, hey, can we get one of them trees when you start to purchase them for the new year, and come plant it as well. But then if you also know any other organizations or areas that need them, there's just a plethora of individuals that can help as well. So, but yeah, money, donate, donate, donate.
Treesdurham.com. I mean, I love that. I'm hearing a lot of different ways that people can show up. If you have tools, if you have space, if you're part of a school or a nonprofit that has resources and expertise, it's just about making those connections, which is why we're here. In terms of, this is obviously such an incredible opportunity and resource to learn, but moving forward, how can people in, their municipalities or their communities access the kind of information that they need to be able to participate either as volunteers or just to learn about what the current projects are, what the opportunities are, what the new big pot of money is that they should be thinking about. Yeah.
Again, this is why I love Trees Durham, because we advocate, right? We work with the city planning, we work with residents, we try to ask questions. Katie Rose Levin, she is an arborist, and so we're very, very fortunate to have access to her to be able to help us really go in and kind of make these answer these questions and make them known to the city council. But I would definitely say, if you don't know, research, right? You don't know what you don't know unless you find out what it's about. But then also just show up at these meetings and really take a listen to what the developers want, what your communities want, and then being able to understand, reaching out to who's who in your community. Like Trees Durham, we're very, very connected in Durham to know different individuals and environmental agencies and things like that. So just reaching out and asking.
North Carolina Urban Community Forestry website, ncforestservice.gov, and programs, Urban Community Forestry. You can find out all of our programs and all of the financial assistance programs. Right now, pretty exciting is the North Carolina Urban Community Forestry Cloud, which is a web-based application that we're finishing version 1 on, pg-cloud.com/North Carolina. You can go and start looking around. This is statewide, so you will see all the stakeholders across the state, all our municipalities, all the information that we collect about where they are on doing management or not, projects that are going on across the state. In terms of the triangle, you can look and see the 4 or 5 tree advocacy groups that work in the triangle area. They're going to be posting projects that they're doing, have information. So the idea is this website also houses all the canopy cover assessments, so you're going to kind of see some pretty cool stuff, but ultimately, hopefully connect everybody. And if you want to see what's going on in your neighborhood or your town, or are interested in finding an advocacy group, hopefully you can go here and help steer you to them.
Oh, I was just going to say real quick, you can Google your local nonprofit environmental nonprofits, to find out who's doing what in your area.
Wonderful. How are we on time? Good. All right. I have a lot of questions and some on Zoom, so you just tell me when to wrap up, okay? That sounds great. This is a good one. This is getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of funding. So are municipalities the primary drivers for funds? What about rural areas? What about federal lands? What's the kind of, who's applying for, I know that there's sort of the 2 buckets, but for the ones that don't go necessarily directly to the forestry program, who's applying for them and who's accessing them?
All I can comment on what I know about how the grant programs are set from the feds coming down. They're put into buckets, and I can also say, our financial assistance go to those communities that are the most needy. And in terms of urban forestry, when we talk about capacity, Raleigh's, even Durham, they have professionals on staff in terms of helping them manage their urban forests. My primary customers are really the smaller communities, and even going out rural, that don't have the need for a full-time forester, all the way down to they really need some help. So we really, the Forest Service, we focus our efforts on the smaller communities that need the most help. And our money has been historically not significant enough to really have the Raleighs and the Durhams, because those are large-scale projects. We didn't really necessarily have a lot of funding. So interestingly enough, most of my funding was really going out to those smaller communities. But that is our focus. This level of funding that we have now certainly opens up to a lot bigger things, but that is still a primary focus for our program, and mine is, we look at where a community is on the management scale, and if you're not so kind and you want to do this, that pushes you up in our awards. So.
All right. Can you give us an idea of the kinds of projects that could specifically address the heat island around major roadways that are in neighborhoods that Bonita described?
I can kind of talk about what we're doing. Like I said, our neighborhood has been described as a heat island, and we're also food insecure. So we really, really, really are pushing for more green space in our area. One of the reasons why we're also developing this community garden and food forest in the area to kind of provide spaces of nature as much as possible as we can. And also it's kind of hard because with development, that's being pushed out so hard right now. I have I-85 is probably like 1.5 miles to the north of my neighborhood. Highway 98 which is they're widening right now, is 0.5 mile to the south. I-70, which they widen, is 1 mile from my house to the west. And on the east side, maybe about, 1/4 mile, sits the freight train line. And there's a huge solar farm right in the middle of all of that, and steel and industrial and all of that other stuff. How do you mitigate that? I don't know. I don't know how unless we eliminate all the industrial that's around us, unless we tell them to make the highway smaller, and stop widening the highways around us. I don't really know that I can answer that question. And interestingly enough, I know that Durham was working really, really hard to reduce their carbon footprint back in 2021, 2022, and they were on the path of that. But in the meanwhile, greenhouse gases have been on the rise, And so all we can do is try to protect as much green space as we possibly can. We're in a space right now that we have the opportunity to actually own 51 acres of conservation land, and that's through the support of another nonprofit, and that's we are a formerly red line community, and they're like, no, they need to have this land over, this watershed. So, it's really, really tough as development goes. How do you mitigate that? So much of it we can't because it's already in place.
Tree planting is the answer to everything, right? Particularly street trees, shading pavement, parking lots, shading pavement. So the challenge is losing the plantable space, that the classic tree lawn, as I like to call it, gets smaller, so that it can't carry a tree. So on the design side, we certainly, as citizens, want to push for designs that allow for creating spaces that trees can live in, and particularly over paved areas and roadways, because a street tree along a roadway, all those environmental benefits I talked about, one, shading the pavement, so it's keeping the cooler temperature, it's capturing dust, air quality, stormwater management. And so identifying those opportunities, and take a look to the city of Raleigh, and he did a heat island mitigation program they have going on right now. They did a heat island study, And now they are going back and replanting in those, planting trees in those high areas, particularly disadvantaged communities, because again, those are our most at-risk folks. And so that program is targeted. And so the answer, that's a good example of a project that's kind of specifically around that type of thing.
Oh, we got Bonita.
I'm going to push back just a little bit because it's a neighborhood by neighborhood type of thing. And I live in a neighborhood that does not have sidewalks and has just a strip of land about this wide on the side of the road for people to walk on. And I live in a neighborhood that is heavily lined with trees and oak woods and pines and big majestic trees. And so in this particular case, it's not a situation of planting more trees as it is the fact that, where Black people were allowed to live were the least desirable places, to live that were, had poor environmental impacts. And so you can't mitigate history by planting trees. I love trees, want to plant trees, yes. But in certain situations, you cannot mitigate history in formerly redlined communities by planting trees.
Yeah, thank you. Norman, I hear we have some Zoom questions.
Yes, thank you. It seems like you've already addressed the issue, but the concern was regarding keeping the tree canopies. At the same time, there are conversations about increasing housing density for poor and middle-income people. It sort of seems like you've answered that question, but is there a little bit additional light you could shed on that? Thanks, Bettina.
Yeah, I'd love to. I've lived in this space for about the past year now, but when we're talking about increasing density to provide housing for middle and low-income people, that's not what's happening at all. Most of the housing that's being developed these days are being developed at market rate, and they do not provide housing for your middle income or your definitely not affordable housing. It addresses that in no way. There was a study that was recently published by Urban Studies under the Urban Institute that dealt with, because we've heard for years, we need density to lower the prices on housing. That's not happened, and there's no data, statistics to prove that happens. The problem is going to be that the way development is moving and adding more density in and providing 5-foot setbacks on properties, there's no room for trees and all of that. So it would behoove everyone in this room, if you care about environments and trees, pay special attention to what's going on in your planning department, at your city council, and all of the text amendment changes that are being proposed and who they're being proposed by, and also pay close attention to what's happening at the state legislature, because they just tried to get a bill pushed through that would basically negate anything that your city planning department, any of their text amendments, any regulation or policy that your city has in place to allow the developers free range to do whatever they want to do, wherever they want to do it. So pay attention.
Thank you very much.
Norman, do you have any more?
I do have another one. Okay. And it's a thank you in a way. Thanks for introducing the permaculture to the group here. And there's an interest in the tool sharing, the tool lending library, if you will. Do we know if there's anything like that currently exists in either Wake County or Raleigh?
Durham Beautiful is a nonprofit that sits under the city of Durham. And so I guess it's like they operate out of the Public Works building. So maybe see with your city government if there's something like that. But they give out pollinator plants. They do a lot of things. They give out pollinator seeds. They source volunteers. But they do have this wonderful big. I can get wheelbarrows, shovels, pruners, lots of stuff, and pick them up and return them. And it's a really good resource for the community. But you'd have to check.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Also, I live in Durham. I live in Lyon Park, and there's also a tool sharing resource that's not necessarily for forestry, but there could be kind of community organizations that have similar roles. Or who are on Zoom. There's a program in Raleigh that is focused on cleanup activities, but through the city. But they might have a tool lending program. Going back to where we started. If you are willing to provide a little bit more information about the associations that Black and Brown communities have with trees, the history there, and other sources of information where folks can learn more about that history.
Well, I think it's just important for everyone to know Black history shouldn't be just Black history. It should be American history. It's a part of the culture in which we were raised in. But, it goes back to a history of lynching, and your hardwood trees were used for that. And so, particularly with a lot of your mature seniors, they don't have a really good relationship with trees and understanding the history of those trees. So I don't want to be morbid. I'm not going to go too much further in that, but I mean, any resource on African American studies and history of slavery, then you would be able to find that.
I don't know if you'll know this off the top of your head or anybody, but what is the current canopy cover percentage in Raleigh and in Durham? And how does that compare, for example, to how does it compare between different regions or different neighborhoods? And how is it changing?
Well, I can say Durham had one completed, some years ago. I know I had discussions with them about doing a new one, but Wake County is just completing a county cover one, and every municipality in the county, that data is going to be available. Comparison, the last study in terms of North Carolina, our urban canopy cover was statistically high, but we are in the South and we can grow trees, so it is a very regional thing. So comparing can be a little bit tricky. You could compare Raleigh to Durham because they're so close together. But most studies, the last study done in North Carolina, Dave Nowak, we are 54% cover across the state on our urban areas. We are losing at that was 2018, we were losing 5,000 acres a year.
And do you know if those losses are kind of disproportionately in certain communities, or?
I would say at this point, no.
Okay.
Because trees are being lost now for development, the main reason why. And when I drove here today, I avoided 70 and took all of the back roads, which took me down Olive Branch Road. If you haven't driven down that way, you need to go. I mean, I think it's like over 20,000 acres of land that's completely clear cut. No trees. You need to go down there. It's really decimating. Water. I'm not going to get into another story talking about water, but you should go. Yeah. So I think what's being lost now is due to development and not necessarily in your disadvantaged neighborhoods.
That seems to certainly be the primary. What's been interesting in some of the canopy studies that we did on the coast, the other was, some hurricanes, add that on top of it. So, but the canopy cover assessments we did on the coastal communities didn't show a significant change between 2014 and 2020. And when you look at the analysis, though, trees are getting added, or other lands that are feral convert to forests. So when the kind of studies that we're trying to do will give us answers where we're losing trees is ultimately the answer. Because when you see, and that's my first thing, is construction. That's where we're losing most. But then you just start doing some of these analysis and you're gaining over here. but certainly development is man is the number one killer of trees.
That's the truth. All right, we've had you up here for a long time and appreciate your time. So maybe as a wrap up, and then I'll bring my ladies back up. Are there any other perspectives on this issue related to environmental justice that you think haven't been addressed, that you want to make sure, you know, is said tonight, or do you have any final words?
I want to say thank you, that you all are here, that you all care, that you're all interested in learning how to make a difference, because that's really important. The first step is in caring. But yeah, just thank you.
Yes, thank you, and act, engage. I mean, you're interested here, and doesn't have to be a lot. A little bit adds up to a lot, just like we were talking. Ultimately, we try and partner and leverage because all of us as a whole make a bigger impact.
And definitely pour back into the youth, engage the youth, because they're coming up right behind us, right? And the more they know and the more that they can see and be active and do, they'll also tend to also train take care of the environment as well. So don't forget our youth. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I was asked by my lady organizers to summarize, which is not my skill set to do that on the spot, but I was trying to take notes and think about what I'm hearing. And, in the Jewish tradition, even for those of us who are not congregationally affiliated, and Phyllis mentioned this, we refer back to this concept of Tikkun Olam, which means repairing the earth. And when you are passionate about and working on environmental issues, the dot is really, you can connect the dots really easily. But I think what I'm hearing tonight is repair is not just about planting trees, it's about repairing that trust, building that trust, building those relationships as a ways to repair. And so along with so much new information, and I think also a stark reminder that these issues are never in silos and should never be thought about in silos. Oh no. I'm taking that with me. Do you guys want to come up or? All right. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. This has been amazing.
I have one other real quick question, if you don't mind. It just came in, and it is pretty interesting, and that is regarding some of the grants that are available and some of the funds that are available. Do you know that if there's anything that can be used for tree maintenance and planting when that's needed, especially with respect to prisoners or people getting out of prison towards reentry into society in a goal towards reducing recidivism?
Well, when you mention, are you talking about a workforce development type program that's
Yes.
targeting? Okay.
Yes.
The answer would be yes, if it's put together by an organization.
Currently, Trees Durham is looking into trying to figure out how to get into that workforce development to be able to take care of the trees, all of the trees that's planted, and to understand the pruning and the benefits and watering, those kinds of things. So yes, there are opportunities. I do not know the name of another organization. They cover Durham and Raleigh, and I want to say Conservation Legacy, but Rachel, let me do some follow-up and get back with you. They have an intern, I believe, program where they actually disseminate children to go out and help with some of these cleanup events and things like that, and I believe they pay them a stipend for it, but I will double check that information and let you know, but that is definitely something I know Trees Durham is looking at checking into.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, panelists. You've just been phenomenal, and I hope you all have gotten some wonderful takeaways today. We are recording this. We will be sharing the recording with you all in the next few days, thanks to Lynn Lyle's YouTube. We'll be sending that out. And after that, I would say thank you and good night.